Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Book Talk. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to Jayna Breigh, who is here to talk about her brand new book, The Hunted Heir. I always have such a hard time. Do you say the H or not say the H? But regardless, this is such a fun book that has some of my favorite things in it because it has romance, it has suspense, and it has the law. So you can understand exactly why I wanted to have her on. But before we get started talking about this book, I wanted to give Jayna just a chance to introduce herself. So, Jayna, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jayna Breigh. I am a retired attorney, is how I phrase it. I practiced law for about a decade. I took a gap year and then I came back in Los Angeles, California. I now live in the Southeast and I don't practice here. I took time off to raise my kids and we did some homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. But the law, you never forget it. So it's inside me.
I love that. And there are so many similarities between us because I homeschooled my kids for a long time. There's the law, there's writing. I just stopped actively practicing about a year and a half ago, but now I teach and I've been teaching for a long time. But bringing the law into our books, it's such a fun thing to do because people are so curious. I mean, there's a reason shows like NCIS, Law and Order, all
Yes.
of those are such perennial favorites. John Grisham, Lisa Scatolini, they're always on the tops of the bestseller list. When you decided to write, well, first tell us about that. How did you decide that you were going to start writing?
Well, my mother was a reading specialist, and I've always been a reader. I was not raised in a household of faith, but when I did come to faith, I learned of this beautiful genre called Christian fiction because I didn't know about that, not having had that in my background. And so I just started with Francine Rivers, which I think is where everybody starts. And I just took it from there. So, flash forward, I decided maybe I could write one of these things that I'm reading. And so that's how it sort of was sparked.
I love that. And, all of us started somewhere, and Francine's books are fantastic. But one of the things I love about Christian fiction today is there's so much space. There are so many different types of books and genres that you can write, and so many different levels of faith that you can incorporate in it. And your book is dealing with people that have different levels of interest in faith. They're not like necessarily like gung ho and like really embracing that. I would call more like they're not even necessarily seekers. They're just kind of like, okay, faith is there. And the heroine actually really has a deep wound
Yeah.
that's almost self-inflicted, but not
Sure.
really.
Sure.
And then the hero's like, okay, I'm tapping in, tapping out to keep someone happy. And so it feels very real and very much this is life. And so many people have those types of relationships with the church and with God and faith.
Mhm.
And then you've incorporating the legal aspects as well. So when you decided to start writing, did you think, oh, I'm definitely going to have the law as an aspect of my book? Or was that something that as you kept kind of looking for the story, you're like, huh, maybe I should pull this in?
No, I did not start with the law because one of the genres I fell into loving was Amish fiction. That
Nice.
was about 10 years ago. And when I really got the germ of an idea to write a book, I thought I was going to write historical. And I kept trying to figure out how to work it out with the Amish, and it just wasn't working. So I realized I had to pivot. And, they say, write what you know. And so
Mhm.
that's when I eventually came around to writing. It was going to be legal romance. And then someone at a publishing house gave me the idea of incorporating a more balanced suspense element. And that's how I ended up with romantic legal drama.
I love that because so much of writing really is not crowdsourcing, but really like pulling in lots of different aspects and lots of different
Yeah.
ideas to get to the point where you're like, okay, this is right. I mean, so many of mine are like this idea and that idea and this idea. And then by the time it all comes together, you almost can't pull them apart because there's such an intricate weaving of this thread and this one and that one. And then it all kind of comes together.
Mhm.
So, how did you get the idea that there was going to be a will and a lost heir? Because that's kind of a not esoteric. I mean, John Grisham has a book about that. That is one of my favorite of his because the faith element's actually pretty strong in that one, the Testament. But how did you get the idea that that was what you were going to kind of pull apart and look at?
Well, I actually practiced in the field of trust and estates litigation. I had like my when I first came out of law school, I practiced for like a year and a half at a just a general litigation firm, and then I was taken on at a firm that handled that. And I even coming to the firm, I did not know how to practice trust and estates litigation. I had just been a litigation attorney,
Yeah,
but that's the way sort of litigation works.
it
You just
is.
wipe out whatever the subject matter is, and the litigation part stays the same. You still have the same procedures and rules and policies. You just have to learn the subject matter. So I ended up learning the subject matter, and I did that with a wonderful group of people. They were wonderful to practice with, so that's sort of that's what I knew. And those cases are so juicy
Yeah, they
that
are.
it lended itself to a book.
I love that. And it's an area that, 90% of trust and estates, no problem, goes right through. But
Yes.
then you have that percentage where it's a mess. And when it's a mess, it is ugly. And
Yeah.
then there's the 7% that you're like, man, if they just talked a little more before they died, it wouldn't have been a mess.
Yes, yes, I agree. And living in Los Angeles, it lended itself to that because there are large estates
Yes.
at stake, and there's entertainers, and there's singers, and there's movie producers. And so that's what makes it work as a place to do
Oh,
estate
yeah.
litigation because the stakes are so high.
Well, you got the intellectual property, which makes it so much
Excellent.
more complicated because it's you can't grasp it and you don't know which copyright or
Yeah.
license is going to take off and which one's going to be. Yeah, you can buy a cup of coffee with that one.
Yes,
So, um, so you've got the legal hook, but now you have to have a hero and a heroine.
sure.
How did you come up with those? Because sometimes for me, the plot's the easy part. Coming up with the characters is the beat my head against the wall part.
Well, it's interesting because you and I then are opposite because I always have the characters first. And the hero of this novel, Demarcus Johnson, actually started two novels ago, because it was going to be a trilogy. And Demarcus was just a side character.
Hmm.
And he was kind of based on somebody I knew at law school. He's kind of based on somebody I knew in college. And so he's been rattling around in my head for 10 years. The second character, Nona, I only have a brother in real life, but I've always loved the dynamic of sister relationships.
Hmm.
And so I knew that I wanted to explore sisterhood and all of its complications in my book.
And you've definitely set that up, really early. You've got the sisters and their interactions going, and there is a just dealing with that. You can go so many different directions because sisters are wonderful, but they can make life messy and complicated. And
Yes,
so that's definitely a layer that you've added there. So you mentioned that this was supposed to be part of a series. Is it a standalone now?
it might be, it might not be. The next book, I actually, right before I got on with you, emailed my next round of edits on my second book in. And so there's a little tiny crossover. You might see one of the characters from this first book in that, but it's the second book is a standalone.
Yeah.
But I people have been asking to have, in particular, Demarcus come back. And I will like he's my most favorite hero that I've written, and I like all of my heroes. And when you write them, you love them all, right?
Mhm.
But he's my favorite child right now.
Well, and it's like when people are like, "What's your favorite book?" I'm like, "You're asking me to pick out of all my children, and there's 42 of them right now. Don't ask me to pick a favorite." Although I'm like, if you want my favorite out of World War II, it's this. If you want my favorite legal, it's this.
Yeah.
No, you can't. It's like when my husband's like, "You're my favorite 16-year-old daughter, and you're my favorite, 14-year-old son," and all that. And they're like, "Dad," they're like, we can find our ways. So if you could go back, you've been writing for a while now,
Mhm.
but I think this is your debut, isn't
It
it?
is. It is.
So if you could go back, and congratulations, by the way,
Thank
because that's
you.
something to celebrate. But if you could go back, because you have been writing for a while and seeking
Hmm.
publication for a while.
Hmm.
Is there anything you would go back and tell Janae 10 years ago when you were starting this journey?
Oh, absolutely. Don't be a pantser. So I pants my way through at least two manuscripts. And then I started going to the library and checking out books about craft. And because the characters come very easily to me, I this is the way I describe it. I have a whole bunch of wonderful characters all dressed up and nothing to do. So so
Yeah.
I had to learn the art of creating a story itself, not just a cast of characters.
Yeah. And it's, I think for most people, it's either the characters are easy or the plot is easy. And then over time, you learn kind of the balance. Like I just got back edits on my book that's coming out next year. I think we share Janera as an editor
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
And she was like, love this character. She's great. Can't wait for people to meet him. This one's a little too perfect. We need to, kind of basically muddy him up a little bit.
Hmm.
So I've been thinking for the last few days, okay, what do I do to muddy him up? How do I make him less than perfect? Blah, 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 blah.
And that's so hard because you love them. You don't
Yeah,
want
well, and
to
this is my
mess
43rd book. You would think by now I would know. And I think I thought that I'd made him not perfect, but I guess he got the
them
stamp
up.
of perfection. And so it's like, it's never perfectly done. And
Yeah,
so it's just kind of interesting that that's why we have editors. That's why it's a team
correct.
sport and not just an individual one.
And shout out to Janier. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she's amazing. She really is amazing. So, what's your biggest challenge as a writer as you're now one book's out, the
Mhm.
second's through edits, and you're probably working on book three? What's what is kind of that the thing that you're like, oh, I really need to keep working on fill in the blank?
I think I need to get, because one of the questions you sent to me was about a writing routine.
Yes.
And I do not have a writing routine. I write in fits and starts.
Yeah.
That's not the best way to be productive as a writer. The second part I would say would be definitely pre-plotting. I I don't even have to know the characters. I can just make characters later. But I really do need to get to the point where the story is all down on paper, plot wise, because I think that will speed up the writing process.
Yeah, when you do have it, it's like stringing beads then when you're writing it, because you could just like sit down and write it.
Mm-hmm.
I still need to do that every time, but when I do do it, it's amazing how much faster the actual writing goes.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, this is always a fun one. What's a significant way that the Hunted Heir changed from the draft through the edits? What's something that Janair made you like shuffle around or change that you were like, oh, I don't want to do that. And then when you did, you were like, oh, this actually made it
So I have
better.
a third POV in the book, but just like you were saying about cardboard sort of characters, my third POV, I thought, oh, he's just third POV. He doesn't have to have a backstory. He doesn't have to have character development. He's just here to service my plot. But she told me to dig in and, like you said, dirty him up some more, give him more motivations. And I think that I'm surprised. I've been sort of reading my Amazon reviews, which I'm told you're not supposed to. But there are people who really like the addition of the third POV. And one person told me that this guy was their favorite character. So
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
Well, and sometimes in suspense, that third character really ramps it up.
Yeah.
And it's easy to go, oh, they have to be purely evil or they have to be this. And one of the best things I ever learned from Donald Moss was everybody either, picks up the stray cat or still goes and gets stuff for their grandma. Everybody's loved by someone. They're
Yes.
not purely evil, and you're like, oh, that's true. So kind of being able to find that
Hmm.
is a really important part of making them actually well-rounded and not just here's the villain, stand them up in the corner and now they're the Joker or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you write in silence or do you write with music?
Both. I do. I would say I think I write in silence. I haven't even thought about the writing part, but I edit. I
Mm.
often have music going, and it's a weird thing, but I love to post on Instagram what I'm listening to right now. So I'll start
Oh
the
yeah.
editing, and I'm like, oh, I'll send a screen cap so people know what is, and the music has nothing to do with the book. I listen to oldies, so I'll listen to oldies from the
Oh,
70s or oldies from the 80s. But I do like to post it because I don't know, I find it fun in a weird way to share with everybody else.
that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I tend to have almost like a not really a soundtrack for a book because some
Mm,
people do that where they have like a literal soundtrack for a book.
yeah.
But I do have the music that I can write to, and it's like how I almost signal to my brain, okay, now it's writing time.
Hmm, hmm,
And
hmm.
so somehow that works for my brain, but I know it doesn't work for everybody. Um, does writing energize or exhaust you?
I love everything about being a writer. I like the writing. I like the editing. Not to discount it being hard.
Yes,
I like being on social media. I like going on and making the actual posts, coming up with the graphics. I
that's awesome.
I love all of it. It's a gift, I feel, to me.
I love that. And that's great that you enjoy all of the pieces of it. I love the social media, but I got to the point with my day job where it was like, okay, I have to hire someone to help me because I'm
Sure.
the only one who can write. And
Yeah.
so there are times I still miss doing a lot of that, but I'm like, when I do pop on, then I'm like, oh. And sometimes like I could just created a whole bunch of graphics for books like this, but then I
Mhm.
send them to Jamie and I'm like, okay, when I post the Goodreads reviews, then you can pull it and you can put it with the graphic I
Yeah.
created. And then she'll make it all beautiful and post it and stuff like that. But so every once in a while, I'll like mass produce a whole bunch of things. They'll be like, here you go, have fun. So, okay, just a couple more questions. Um, oh, which of your characters do you think you would get along with in real life? I think I know which one you're going to say, but I'm real curious.
Oh, obviously G Mama or Pastor Grant. I
Oh,
would have,
okay.
yeah, I would have no problem. And part of the reason I have in all of my manuscripts, I have senior citizens. When I moved to Los Angeles, I went to a beautiful little teeny tiny Presbyterian church, and everyone there was a senior citizen. They all had white hair, and they just loved me, and I grew so much there. And so I have a special place in my heart for wise, believing senior citizens because they're able to change people's lives. You have,
Absolutely.
yeah, you have more mission left in you because you can reach back and pull somebody up. So I definitely, yeah,
I love that. And they have so much wisdom that often people overlook
yeah,
because they're older. And you're like, no, they have so much they can share with you. So I love that you, as a younger adult, could see the value in that. That's
oh, yeah.
awesome. Okay, last two. And I don't often get to ask people these. So I'm really curious to see what your answers are.
Sure.
Name through three authors who've inspired your writing.
Oh, sure. So Becky Wade,
Oh, yes,
um, yes,
love her books.
Tammy L. Gray has inspired me a great deal. And then, oh, I don't want to, there's so many in this last lot. There was a period where I was reading independently published books by African American
Yeah,
writers, the romance genre. And I there's so many, but I want to say Michelle Stimson. I want to
yeah.
say Basurka Vaughn. So there's so many, but that's a whole nother sort of category. And I found that there's a lot of good independent writing. It's not like the Wild West like it was 10 years ago, where everybody's putting out a 99-cent book. But
Yeah.
some of the early pioneers of African American Christian fiction.
I love that. That's awesome. And then what was your favorite book as a child?
Pat the Bunny
Oh,
is a little
yeah,
yes. Um, Go Dog Go.
another
So
good one.
yeah, my mom was a reading specialist, so I remember I just started reading pretty early,
Yeah.
and my mom would read books at night before she went to bed, and then she would come and she would tell us about them at the dinner table. So she read Watership Down, for example,
Oh,
and
yes.
then she would tell us about it. Not all the books were great for kids. She read this book called The Taking of Pelham 123. I was riveted. She would take out the scary parts and the
Yeah,
quiet parts. But yeah, so my mom made sure that we were hearing about books, reading books, going to the library, because
I
that's
love
what
that.
she did for a living.
I love that. No wonder you love words and writing books. That's just, it's in your DNA. That's
It,
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
oh,
Now, where can people learn more about you and your books?
I can be found everywhere on the internet at JaynaBreigh. I am the only Jayna Breigh spelled that way on the internet. So put that in, it will take you to all of my channels.
I love it. And this book has been such fun to read that I think readers, especially those who love romantic suspense, and even with a taste of law, but you don't have to love law to really enjoy it, are going to really enjoy The Hunted Heir. Thanks again for joining me today, Jayna.
Oh, thank you. It's been a privilege.